anyhow, so I did stay up late enough at the final party and went home with this woman, Doralise, and of course fell in love with her. And Mary was lovers with Doralise's close friend. And we immediately bonded. Even before I moved to Amsterdam. So I moved to Amsterdam for Mary, for Doralise, and Mary was my best friend, and we had a sleepover date every Thursday, and the big thing was breakfast the next morning, and we would sit. She was on the second floor. It's on one of the most beautiful canals, the Bloemgracht. And at that point, they were replacing all these cobblestones, so it was really fun to sit in the window and watch them work and drink coffee. And so we were just very close. And then we met two other American writers, lesbians, a couple, and we had a writers group together. And one of the writers was Rachel. She actually had an obituary in the New York Times. She was a science fiction writer and a tarot expert and a trans woman. Anyhow, Rachel. Oh God, this is terrible. Anyhow. So we had this writers group together, and Mary and I were very bonded, best friends. And I remember when I was having a really hard time in Amsterdam, the woman I moved there for, I only stayed with her for 4.5 months, but I was in love with Amsterdam. And I remember we were walking in her neighborhood on her street, and she said, "Ter, this city doesn't deserve you. Amsterdam doesn't deserve you." And I said, "No, that's true." And then we passed this very particular building. I don't think there's anything else like it. It's 4 of the classic 17th century houses in a row. And they even have the original greenish bottle glass in the windows, you know. And I remember saying, "These buildings deserve me." For not the rest of the city. So we were going through our ups and downs in Amsterdam together because Mary and Patty had broken up, and you know what. And she was working on. Had her first book been published yet? I think it had been bought, but by the English publisher. She came too late, but it hadn't been published yet. And so, and she wasn't doing any visual anything at that. I didn't even know she could draw, you know. So she had been in Holland much longer than me, and I was going to be moving back, at least temporarily. And Mary had this. In her mind, she couldn't move back. There was these barriers to moving back to San Francisco. And then finally I said, "Mayor, there's not anybody waiting at the border for you to keep you from moving back to the United States." And so anyhow, I was living upstairs and she was my housemate. And she got very involved in the film community, which is, I think, how you met her.
No, I met her because she answered my 28-year-old arts administrator little ad in Presida Park Cafe.
Right. She wanted a housemate who was 28-year-old arts administrator.
Exactly, not an artist.
Not an artist. Yeah, that's right. So
there was too many, you know.
So we were very close, and we also had a lot of conflicts. But I was I consulted with her on Divine Victim. She paid me $15 an hour and I said, Mary, I'll do it for free. No, she wanted to pay me for it, you know? And so I felt very proud of being involved with that novel and, you know, helping her. And I felt it was really a depiction of a real lesbian relationship with all its complications between two very fallible people. So I thought it was very real, actually. But I discovered when I forced my book group to read it recently that the other people were not fond of it because there's nobody totally positive to identify with, you know, and people really wanted that in a murder mystery, you know. So that was very interesting, and so I have a lot of her art. She's given me some of it I bought. Yep. Most of it have just been, Mayor, I really love this. Can I have it?
When did you notice that she started drawing?
That's a good question. I mean, I knew that she had done the comic.
Yeah.
But that was really in the distant past. That was the 70s.
Right.
So she became more and more invested in just drawing as a practice all the time. I mean, she wouldn't go anywhere without her book to draw in. And sometimes I had to say, Mary, no, you can't sit there drawing. It's a play, you know.
Or a movie, because she'd come to Frameline with us, and it would be like...
Yeah, you have to put your pencil and pencil away and just sit there with your hands doing nothing for a little time. But I was always just so incredibly... She was a person of tremendous talents, okay? And she was also very beautiful. She said that her mother adored her, that her mother used to kind of follow her around. And I can well imagine that, because when she came home with me for Thanksgiving at my parents' house, it was clear that my mother would have traded me in for Mary in 5 seconds. She definitely thought Mary was a much better daughter, potential person to present to the world as a daughter. And Mary did this. Show
me some of the art. Yeah.
Okay. So when Mary was visiting at Thanksgiving,
yeah,
she did this watercolor for my parents. And I mean, I think this watercolor is incredible.
Yeah.
It is.
And she just did it.
Yeah.
That's all, as a gift for my parents. And I was, when I had to wait for my mother to die before it became mine. But, even this little shepherd with two just little dashes of black and white, I don't know. And I think this was just from her imagination. It wasn't, she was making a watercolor based on a photo or anything like that. She was just hanging out and had a little free time while she was at my parents' house in LA. So her talent was amazing, and she also was musically talented. She was the kind of person who could just pick up an instrument and figure out how to play it. And she was in Holland, they had a little band, and she played the banjo in it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And then this was all Dykes, making this little band. And then she applied for, I don't know whether it was permanent residency or citizenship, but she was never really legal as as a long-term resident in Holland. At that time, if you were white and were not taking a job away from a Dutch person, they didn't care. They were, they were perfectly happy for you to be there. So she decided she wanted to really make it legal, and so she applied. They had a thing where if you had some talent or ability that didn't already exist in Holland, you could have a very fast track to permanent residency. And so she applied as a banjo player for permanent residency in Holland, and they considered her application, and they finally decided, it is true, we don't have any banjo players in Holland, but the fact is, Holland doesn't need any banjo players. She couldn't get permanent residency.
Oh,
I think it's brilliant. She tried, though.
I know. Oh,
It
that's
was
great.
so funny. So I remember this party where they were, it was really an all-dyke party. It was it was a major event. It was the birthday, probably the 60th birthday. She was like the oldest woman in the group, and she was considered a very, very big deal. She had this completely screwed up life. And she had 4 sons who were all junkies. But anyhow, it was in a big loft somewhere, and it was a very important party. And the band, they had worked out this song, like 5 of them, and Mary was one of them. And so they were standing up singing this song, and this one woman, however her top was on, it fell down, and her breasts were exposed. And one woman in this band. So Mary, I was always so impressed with this, in solidarity, pulled her own shirt down. So her breasts were exposed too. I thought
great.
that was so great.
Oh,
So funny.
So Mary was going through a very hard time because she had been part of this group, sort of a group of lesbians who were an intellectual elite. Patty, her lover, had been one of them. And there's a lot of meanness in Dutch culture, a lot of in interpersonal relationships. Status is very important in Holland. I mean, at one time, when I was first there, I was invited by these dykes to dinner, and they said, what do you think of the Dutch lesbian scene? And I said, it's like high school with, these incredibly important status games, And they asked, oh, well, if it's high school, who's the prom queen? I mean, this is how sophisticated their culture is they know concepts like the prom queen, and not from our culture.
Yeah.
Who's the prom queen? And at this same party, where Mary and this other woman were bare-breasted, I was able to observe, the whole group together at this important party. And I said, the one playing the drums is the prom queen. And that shut them up because she was the prom queen. Anyhow, so Mary then they separated. I think it was a very mutual separation, but Mary still assumed that she would be part of this whole social group. And they rejected her because she was no longer with Patty. She no longer had Patty's status, And we used to call them the gemene meisjes, the mean girls, And I was so happy. I broke up with my girl, the woman I moved there for, very early on, but Mary was with Patty for 5 years. So I was so happy that I never was part of that group, because you really, if you were out of it and you saw all the social
Yeah.
games that were being played, it was very unhealthy. And so unfortunately, how they were rejecting Mary was one at a time. And so, she was always saying, no, dear, these, other women, they're okay. They're not Gemeene meisjes. And then they would turn their backs on her. So she went through this whole period of, I think it was a transition before she moved to back to San Francisco. It was very, very painful. And, she and I were solid always, when we were in Holland. I should tell the story about when we were on our trip to Italy, where her friends were trying to convert her to heterosexuality. Yeah. Okay. So Mary and her two friends.
Wait, I'm going to stop.